Good morning. I welcome you to this round table that will take up the issues of international debt and the role of the Czech Republic in the process. And we shall also open the issue of how debts are reflected in the most painful problems that we have, such as climate change and the increasing inequality. In 1982, that crisis started. Many states were indebted, but the harder it was, it hit the hardest countries such as Brazil, Argentina and Mexico. A series of experiments was started seeking a possibility to solve the crisis. Some of them were successful, some were not. In 1985, it turned out that it is necessary to start a systemic solution. Initiative of the most indebted countries was high-indebted poor countries initiative was the name, and it was supposed to start remission of debts, not to the most indebted ones, poor countries. When we speak of it globally, it was really, they were small debts, but really fatal for the countries themselves. A year later, an international initiative and a campaign was started. In the recent decades, the Jubilee 2000 Erosion in German, the way. More than 20 million signatures collected asking for remission of debts to start a systemic solution for sovereign debtors. And the same responsibility was supposed to be equal between creditors and debtors. So as equilibrium was reached, the initiative was more or less successful, especially thanks to strong public support. And that is why we are here, because we want to explain the issues, to seek for solutions together with politicians and broad public. Many countries achieved some degree of that remission, and many rich countries also realized that they have responsibility when providing credits or loans, and that they are responsible also for what is done to the financial means. I am so glad to welcome here our colleague Heron Belfon from Jubilee Caribbean. It is a branch of the movement that was started in 1996 and is aimed at solving the debt problems in Caribbean. The Caribbean is also hit by climate change, but also neo-colonial and post-colonial practices which hit hard on the countries in question and make real development impossible. That would be built on the actual needs of the local inhabitants. I am also glad to meet Robert Stoyanov, who is involved in the issues of development aid. He is the author of many studies. He was the first to actually analyze in detail the debts held by the Czech Republic. He is the main author of the brochure we have here. Because the Czech Republic and previous to it Czechoslovakia have their unfortunate role. I will not take more of your time now. I'm glad that we can meet after years and can discuss the issues which are not paid too much attention to by the media, but it is still one of the most painful problems international. Can I now ask Heron to make her presentation?
Thank you for having me. A special thank you to Carolina for inviting me and inviting Jubilee Caribbean to present at this meeting. My name is Heron Belfon, the recently appointed project coordinator of Jubilee Caribbean, and in today's presentation, I will give you an overview of the current debt situation in the Caribbean, as well as an outline of the effects of climate change on the current debt structure of most of the English-speaking Caribbean small island developing states. At the end, I will outline possible responses to the side effects of climate change and how we can better prepare for natural disasters in the future. The Caribbean is a chain of islands located between North and South America. It starts close to Florida in the north, and the last island is only a few miles north of Venezuela. As a region, we have many things in common, with the most shared factors being culture, especially our music, language, and food. So CARICOM is an abbreviation that we have for Caribbean community, and just like any community, we have numerous attributes and challenges in common. A few of these are culture, climate, and debt. Most of the 15 islands making up CARICOM, as you can see here, we have Haiti, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, the Bahamas, Belize, Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Montserrat. And we all land somewhere between highly debted and critically debted. Developing states in the Caribbean cover a total landmass of 462,904 square kilometers, and we have a population of approximately 18,599,442 citizens residing across the 15 countries I listed earlier. The main exports of the Caribbean islands are petroleum, mining products, bananas, sugar, and rum. We have mostly commodities, financial services, and tourism as exports. Our most important resources are fisheries, agriculture, forestry, mining, and oils. As you can tell, each of our most valuable resources can be easily wiped out by one of any of our three major natural disasters. This is why it is imperative to have the facilities available for rebuilding soon after an earthquake or hurricane strikes. In a 2008 report published by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, an increase in commodity prices and a corresponding decrease in agricultural produce and mining and minerals is projected over the next few years. This is mostly as a result of the ongoing trade wars between the United States and China, which can result in increased. Okay. This is mostly as a result of the ongoing trade wars between the United States and China, this can result in increased prices and a widening of the trade deficit, which in turn can lead to more borrowing to cover the losses these incidents occur. So Jubilee Caribbean is a non-governmental organization, much like Jubilee Germany, UK, and USA. The main focus of our organization is working along with government and other organizations to outline fiscal policies which will reduce the heavy debt of the Caribbean islands. Additionally, the Caribbean Office will begin to work alongside government lending agencies such as the International Monetary Fund to devise credit terms which are unique to our specific situation of being small, vulnerable to frequent natural disasters, and already highly indebted. Debt is considered sustainable or unsustainable, depending on the ratio of internal to external debt, as well as the percentage of GDP that the debt is total. Both the IMF and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank agree that debt is considered sustainable once it remains below the 60-to-1 debt to GDP ratio. So far, the only country in the region that has managed to achieve this accomplishment is St. Kitts and Nevis. Grenada is close to that target and will achieve this milestone soon with its current debt to GDP ratio at 62.7%. As long as current policies and procedures are maintained and the country is not hit by another natural disaster. We are well on our way of achieving the target of 55% at the end of 20,000. Barbados, on the other hand, is in the middle of a financial restructuring after a period of exorbitant sovereign debt, reaching a high of 157.1% debt to GDP ratio in 2008. So far, measures have been installed, and that figure is said to be decreasing. The IMF just recently awarded Barbados a US $90 million extended arrangement under the fund facility for Barbados. The fund extension will go a long way in helping Barbados to recover from its current financial distress. As you can see from the slide here, once debt passes the 60-to-1% debt to GDP ratio, there is a steep increase in borrowing and the levels of debt. Okay, so you see 60% goes across, and after that there's a massive increase in, which is a worsening situation for us in the Caribbean. Yes? The Organization of American States lists the natural disasters affecting the Caribbean region as earthquakes, hurricanes, and torrential rain, which leads to landslides and flooding. The OAS also acknowledges lesser risks from storm surge and tsunamis. The region has always been hit by hurricanes, and in recent years, this has led in one way or another to the restructuring of our debt. On average, since January 19th to February 18th, when I prepared this, there has been an average of 2 small earthquakes per day in the Caribbean. And though these are small, they cannot be overlooked as Haiti is still recovering from the devastation of its magnitude 7.1 earthquake in 2010, which killed an estimated 300,000 people and left countless others hurt and homeless. 9 years later, not only is Haiti still struggling to recover from the trauma caused by that earthquake, but also there are tremors every few days. And in a country, a situation like this, it is almost impossible to pay off debts and meet the welfare needs of the people. In 2017, Dominica was shattered and Barbuda was almost completely wiped out, with residents having to evacuate to mainland Antigua by Hurricanes Maria and Irma. Barbuda had a debt to pay to the IMF the day after the hurricane hit, but the payment was not cancelled off or extended, and the island had to close its eye to the plight of its people to pay the IMF. So the debt owed to the IMF by Antigua and Barbuda was $2 million, compared to US $152 million caused in damages by the hurricane. Many persons, including Catholic Bishop Gabriel Malze, wrote seeking a moratorium, but they were turned down. And these natural disasters incur debts multiple times the GNI of a country, which leads to deteriorating finances and makes it harder to both meet the needs of citizens and repay debts, ultimately leading to debt unsustainability. In a visit to Grenada last month, Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, Mr. Tao Zhang, spoke about the devastation he saw in Dominica more than a year after Category 5 Hurricane Maria. He stressed that the intensity of natural disasters across the region as a result of climate change often leads to high debt and low growth. His advice to the region is to implement preparedness measures which will reduce the effects of natural disasters, as well as to improve physical structures, such as buildings, etc., which will decrease periods of rebuilding and take the focus back to business in a shorter time frame. In order to install preemptive measures to fight climate change, Grenada recently created a new ministry, the Ministry of Climate Resilience. A number of other countries in the region have also implemented a plan or have plans to implement measures to better prepare for natural disasters. At the same meeting with the IMF, Grenada's Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Mitchell, called on Caribbean governments to implement the hurricane clause into loan agreements with the IMF. This clause will ensure that in the event of a hurricane, we will be granted a moratorium for at least 1 year. Additionally, the building codes in Grenada were recently amended to ensure that buildings are constructed to withstand Category 5 hurricanes, and the Prime Minister is advocating for the same for other countries in the region that are usually affected by hurricanes. In 2008, small island developing states saw decreased access to international sources of funding, particularly special consideration funding from the IMF. This happened for two reasons. First, countries which are doing well, such as Grenada and St. Kitts and Nevis, increased in status from low developing nations to middle developing nations. As a result, increased financial growth leads to an increased per capita income, which these things are calculated on. Second, access to funding in general was reduced, and new loopholes eliminate many developing Caribbean islands from access to funding for much-needed undertakings, such as climate resilience. The ideal scenario for the Caribbean islands, for every country, I can assume, is debt sustainability. That is the condition, this is the point at which the country can both service its debt for the foreseen future without compromising its obligations to the people. The Interagency Task Force on Financing for Development has created a debt sustainability framework, which includes a tool that can predict outcomes in certain scenarios. This realism tool, as it's called, based on a mix of public and private debt levels, natural disasters, etc. And this is just one example of resources available to government and other finance decision makers to assist with making sustainable financial choices. Unfortunately, an economy can be as successful as ever. However, given the increasing intensity of natural disasters can change in an instant. The effects of climate change, mainly rising seawater levels and increasing temperatures, increase the strength and ultimately devastation caused by hurricanes and other natural disasters. Hurricanes in recent time have been more frequent and unrelenting compared to previous ones, and scientists believe that it will continue, and the future hurricanes will wreak havoc on any landmass they pass over. To Caribbean islands, the hardest reality to live with concerning climate change is that we make the smallest contribution. We have little to no carbon footprint, yet we experience the worst effects of it. This situation is a very difficult one to be in, especially since the damages caused leaves behind only mayhem and piling debt. There are two possible solutions to counter this situation. One, a moratorium, and two, climate resilience strategies. If creditors, such as the IMF, agree to postpone repayment after a natural disaster, it will go a long way to ensure the long-term economic stability of said country's economy. It would also give the affected countries the opportunity to focus on rebuilding and meeting the critical needs of its citizens. Secondly, investment in climate resilience strategies. The Deputy Managing Director of the IMF and other supporters of this option propose that the focus should be shifted from a defense to an offense position. In other words, when our islands in the Caribbean should prepare before being struck by a natural disaster. That way, it makes recovery in the end easier after we have been hit. These strategies include building code changes, as mentioned earlier, and sea defenses to deal with storm surges, etc. This measure additionally includes a financial for natural disasters with a guideline to follow, which will ensure debt sustainability. The islands should now seek to acquire funding geared specifically towards contending with climate change. Some projects which should be undertaken to mitigate the effects of climate change and natural disaster to build water storage and treatment facilities. After Hurricane Ivan in 2004 in Grenada, over 90% of the island was affected. In the area where I lived with my family, we did not have running water for months, and the water trucks had to bring water to the communities every day. Fortunately, we lived in an area where there are natural springs, so we did not suffer for water, but not many had that opportunity or that luck. For those of you who have been to the Caribbean or you know about the Caribbean, the islands are very, very hilly, except for one or two, very mountainous. And so, whenever there's a hurricane or torrential rainfall, sometimes we have rain for days, and which leads to major erosion as a result of the runoff. And this usually leads to loss of crops, livestock, and in some instances, people's homes and lives. Finally, the Caribbean islands need to invest in sea defense mechanisms to address the matter of storm or sea surges. And this is whereby the water levels increase in surges, and in coastal areas, the shores, beaches, and property gets washed away into and by the sea. We have many options in terms of what we can do. However, based on challenges we face with our own finances, our debt, what is available to us, what is not available to us. There's very little that we can do in terms of preparing for a next natural disaster. With everything that we've learned over the past few years in the Caribbean pertaining to debt and climate change, we still have a long way to go with what we need to do. We keep hearing, as I said earlier, that climate change will get worse and we'll continue to feel the worst part of it. However, in some cases, being small islands, we can only wait. But as Mr. Zhang said, we are a determined people, and we always pick up the pieces and rebuild after these natural disasters. And at the moment, we are doing all we can to preserve our culture, implement sustainable debt policies, and live as normal lives as we possibly can until the next disaster strikes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And of course, we realize that the situation is tragic, and it really indicates how countries that are responsible, in fact, are parasites on countries whose responsibility is much, much lower. But the impacts of climatic change or natural disasters is much bigger, and also impacts of economic experiments. We make a break. But at this moment, if you have any question or you would like to clarify something, then I would like to urge you to raise your questions. I'm not sure, but you might have said it, but I would like to say, what is the size of debt of Grenada?
At the moment, there are two figures. The first figure is we are close to $1 billion in debt, and that is including debt to China. However, not including debt to China, Grenada is over $300,000 million. Over $300 million US in debt.
Which countries, or IMF, or?
IMF, yes, mostly to the IMF, Caribbean Development Bank, World Bank. We have, those are the big ones. Yes.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Any more questions? Well, may I add that this book, The Prospects of Development, there is an article which I wrote, Debt Crisis and Impossibility to Draw Lessons, and also the unsustainability of debt is shown there. It dates back to 2015, but the table, I believe, is quite instructive on what the situation is in countries and their ability to repay debt. Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions. First is about the graph you showed, where the development of debt was shown. Was that linked to any single country? And what time was considered? We saw the percentages of GDP, but we could not see a time perspective. And second question is there any connection between the development of indebtedness of the Caribbean countries and the environmental change or climate change or natural disasters that happen there?
To answer your first question, the IMF and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank would like for debt to be less than 65, preferably 60%. If we go across here, we look at the sustainability. At 60, 65%, everything is fine. However, once that starts to increase, this is our debt and how unsustainable it becomes, this rapid increase here.
The question is the
There's no time frame. This is just showing the percent and where do we prefer debt to be. So for example, if, okay, in school your pass mark is 60%, this is, here, you're fine. But if you go lower, you fail. In this case, it's the opposite. So if, for example, a country's debt to GDP ratio is 90%, what this is saying is that this here is bad. So once you cross 65%, this is bad. You see it?
So this is not a real GDP ratio for any country or any region?
No.
Okay.
So consider this up to 65 here, which is the high, sustainable. So in the bottom here is sustainable. And once you cross this and you go up, this is unsustainable.
Okay.
Yeah?
That's a theoretical model.
Pardon?
This is a theoretical model.
Yes, yes. And your second question is, how has climate change led to the increased debt in the Caribbean? So climate change has led to the increased intensity and the number of times, for example, earthquakes. These days we've been hit with more earthquakes, more and severe hurricanes. Before, you'd have a 10-year period between two hurricanes. Now it's decreased to 2 years. A Category 5 hurricane in 1955 hit Grenada. Compared to the Category 4 hurricane we had in 2004, the Category 4 hurricane was stronger than what was a Category 5 hurricane in 1955. So not only, also after the 2004 hurricane in Grenada, we had one in 2005. So we had Hurricane Ivan September 7th, and then we had Hurricane Emily the following June. Right? So we had 1955, this long gap, and then 2004, 2005. After that, we've been hit with many instances of torrential rainfall. We'll have days where it just rains out of nowhere. The rains would come. There's no building up to it to say, well, okay, it's going to rain, expect this. Sometimes the weather forecast comes a couple hours before, and it's a mad dash to get things ready. So what I'm getting at is we experience a lot of natural disasters now more frequently and stronger than what they were before. That's being attributed to climate change, as in the increased temperatures. It is getting hotter. It's hotter now than I remember it being as a child. Yes? And this leads to increased debt, as in after these natural disasters that we're being hit with more frequently, we have to borrow more frequently. With the change in building codes, we need to borrow to rebuild or what's the word I'm looking for? Brace, public buildings, government buildings, to the new standard of Category 5 hurricane levels. More resilient, thank you very much. Yes, even domestic debt is increasing because as citizens, with the new building code, when we're building our own homes, we need to borrow more money because we need to put more into it to, meet building codes. And whereas before you build a house, and in Grenada you didn't have to go through any stress, or not stress, but the procedure of having someone come to check your building to see whether or not it was fit to live in. Before, most people went to the lumber shop, got their lumber, or they went to the block plant, got their building blocks, built their homes, lived in it. But now you can't do that anymore. And with these new regulations that we have to meet, it costs more to build. It includes more material, so you need to borrow more money, which leads to more borrowing, and that's how our debt is increasing, both personally and on a government levels, because we have to rebuild government buildings, parliament buildings, have to rebuild schools, or build as we go. So most of the schools now, they're being built piece by piece by piece. Yeah, so that's how it's being done. But then the monies have to be borrowed because, as we said, commodity prices are going up, and inflation and everything costs more. So yes.
Okay. request more money in form of debts for reconstruction of the local, I don't know, buildings, roads, schools, and other logistic or construction of more resilient buildings because of this increasing frequency of nature disasters.
Yes.
Or increasing intensity of the
Yes.
nature disasters.
Yes.
Okay.
So what Caribbean governments now are trying to do is prepare before rather than having to build from the ground up after. Because it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's when. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When you're answering on the first question, you said that you made the difference between debt from the IMF
Yes.
and debt from China. What is the difference between that? Is it a difference in quality or difference in coping with it?
No. So Grenada's debt with China is, I'm not even sure if I can speak on this, but it's a special arrangement, as in we don't know how much exactly it is. And international agencies can only guess. For example, China comes in and we have a brand new stadium, but we don't know if it's built for free or if we have to pay them back. Even as a Grenadian, I don't know if they gifted us the stadium or if you have to pay for it. So when it comes to Grenada and debt with China, it's anybody's guess. We're not sure what the exact figure is, yes.
Jiří Došek is my name. I would like to ask, is there a possibility of insuring the building in case of disasters? And if there is insurance, how is it reflected in the actual situation?
As I mentioned before 2004, because most of us were not alive in 1955, right? Grenada is a very young population. See, most of us are 1960s and over, so my parents' age and younger. Yes? So insurance was not a big thing before 2005, home insurance. If you go to the bank to get a loan to build your home, then one of the conditions of your loan would be you have to insure your home for as long as you owe the bank a mortgage, as long as you pay back a mortgage. Once you've paid back the money, paid back the bank, it's up to you. It's personal preference whether you want to insure your home or not. So most of the homes in Grenada, well, as far as I know, I need to do some research on the other islands, but speaking from a Grenadian perspective, most of the homes were not insured 2004 and 2005. Because if you have the money, you go to the lumberyard, you buy your materials, you go home and you build a house, and that's it. No one had to check. There was no insurance company saying, oh, you need to insure your home. So, no. Even the house I grew up in was not insured before the hurricane. So, yes. I think now a lot more people are insuring their homes after, we were in our house and we just saw the neighbor's house just went like this. And we lived on a hill, and the house just came off the pillars and slid down the hill like nothing. Yeah, and if the hurricane had lasted maybe 30 more minutes, we would have lost our roof. Yeah. And then the day after, we went outside, and it was.
And on the governmental level or administration level, public sector, is it the same?
Pardon?
Is it the same on the governmental level or on the public sector buildings?
It's not to the extent that, like, personal level, but it was not the best either. Because even up to today, we have buildings that have not been rebuilt after the hurricane. So when you visit the city, if you come to Grenada and come to St. George's, it's a combination of old buildings, old government buildings like the old courthouse. It's just there in the middle of the city, massive building. It used to be a beautiful structure with trees growing out of it now. And then next to it, you'll see a brand new building. So it's been a very long time, but most of the government buildings have not been rebuilt. Where the current ministers and civil servants sit, those buildings, yes, have been rebuilt. Only 2018, we got a new parliament building, after a new permanent parliament building rebuilt from since 2004. So, yes, it's not as bad as personal, but there were still great challenges in getting government buildings up and running. Yes. And also, I think the government focused on rebuilding the schools before the government buildings. That's why we only got the new parliament building last year. So they rebuilt the schools first. Yeah.
And you now travel around Europe. What do you think could your journey bring? What? Oh, once again. I know that you now flew to the Czech Republic, then you go to Germany, you will take part in a similar meeting. What is your message you want to deliver? What can we do in Europe to improve the situation?
So the main message I believe I'd like to bring across is that it's a challenge that we've been facing, that we're facing now, and given the issue of climate change or the effects of climate change that we're experiencing, our debt is increasing. Also with life support from the European countries, European citizens, after we've been hit by a natural disaster, to support us in front of the IMF and other international agencies in getting a moratorium. So we have some time to rebuild the country and get things back up and running before we have to pay debt and try to do that. Yes. So if we get a moratorium, then it means we can rebuild, and when we're back to a sustainable situation, we start back repaying our loans, compared to having to borrow money to rebuild an island and use the monies we have to pay the loans. Because usually when natural disasters hit, the damage is 100, let's say, for example, let's use Barbuda. The amount that Barbuda owed to the IMF was $2 million, and the damage was $152 million US dollars. So the damages that we have to, deal with after a natural disaster is a lot more than what we have to pay back. So if we can get the opportunity to deal with what is most important and critical first and then pay back, then that would be greatly appreciated. So if we can just, acknowledge what is happening. We might be small islands, so we don't have a big voice outside of the Caribbean. So I'm here to be the voice of the Caribbean islands and to get support for a moratorium in the event of a natural disaster.